You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, day 3 of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
It's the honour of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
Tim Walz takes to the stage, stepping into the spotlight and claiming his place in the Democrats' presidential race. We'll hear the latest news from a polished and confident meeting where the Democrats seem ready to take on Donald Trump. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, who are India's allies? As Narendra Modi heads to Ukraine, we'll examine a delicate balancing act Delhi is managing to try to keep everybody on side. And Monocle's magazine September Mobility Special is now on stands. We'll join our editors in London and Tokyo as they take you inside the issue, talking about everything planes, trains and automobiles. Here's a sneak peek of our design editor Nick Moniz on his favourite story.
My personal favourite was this sort of mad story following a taxi through the streets of Florence. And it was this whole idea about the Ford Tornado is this new, 8-seater vehicle that's really become, the luxury people mover of choice, if that can be such a thing.
We'll hear more on that a little bit later, plus the latest business news and a roundup of the newspapers too, and why small is beautiful. We'll look at the revival of Southeast Asia's secondary city airports. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. Egypt has expressed scepticism about a so-called bridging proposal intended to bridge gaps in ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. Ukraine has attacked Moscow in what Russian officials called one of the biggest drone strikes on the capital since February 2022. And Brazil says it's to limit the number of foreign citizens entering the country as part of a plan to stop people from using Brazil as a base to migrate to the US and Canada. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, there's been a gradual change of seasons this week at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, with Joe Biden's swan song and Hillary Clinton passing the baton to presidential candidate Kamala Harris on Monday, followed by the midweek star turn of the Obamas. The final days of the convention now look ahead to what will be a tough fight to beat Donald Trump to the White House. On day 3, we heard from Oprah Winfrey, former President Bill Clinton, and the vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. And to tell us what happened on day 3, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now from Chicago by the reporter H.J. Mai. A good evening to you, H.J. Good morning from us.
Yeah, hey, how's it going?
Well, very well, thank you. Now, day 3, what was the atmosphere like? Because up until now, we've heard adjectives such as raucous and giddy and confident come through. Did this permeate through the third day?
No, definitely not. I mean, compared to the first 2 days, this was definitely a more subdued day. The atmosphere, it was still, joyful and there was a lot of cheering going on, but it was definitely not as loud. And, the crowd also was not, it seems like did not get into it as much, was not as enticed by the speeches tonight. I think Walz was the only exception, the vice presidential candidate. But no, it was definitely of all the 3 days so far, this was the most low key one, I would say.
Let's go through some of the speeches that were delivered, and let's begin with the vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. I mean, the fact remains is that I think safely many people would not have heard of him a few weeks ago, or not so in such a high-profile role. But now he has become the vice presidential nominee. He's had to step up quite well, and he arguably did it quite elegantly by saying, I haven't given a lot of big speeches like this, but I have given a lot of pep talks.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, he was not a well-known governor. I think, people in Minnesota, the surrounding states knew who he is. But yeah, like you said, he had to step up, now being the vice presidential nominee. it was really an opportunity for him to introduce himself to the nation, to people who have never heard of him, and now looking, to make a decision come November. He talked about, his upbringing as a small town kid in Nebraska. And you mentioned the pep talk. I mean, before his political career, he was a high school teacher, and he also coached high school football. And actually, he was introduced by a former student of his and neighbor, and the high school football team that he coached to a state championship actually appeared on stage before he came out. So I think that was a nice moment. His speech just laid out once again, tried to make the difference between what a Harris-Walz administration would be compared to a Trump-Vance administration. There was a lot of talk about freedom tonight and what freedom for Democrats looked like compared to freedom for MAGA Republicans. So I think he did a nice job. It was a short speech compared to what we've heard in recent days. He only spoke for about 16 minutes, but he got the crowd going. And, one highlight definitely that is you can find everywhere on social media right now is the reaction of his kids, especially his 17-year-old son, Gus, who was just crying during the whole speech and basically pointing at his dad constantly and saying, "That's my dad," and really being proud of what his father has accomplished.
He's playing an incredibly important role, isn't he, for the Democrats? I mean, he was described like yesterday as the dad in plaid. But the fact is that Tim Walz has to be the most relatable person around, doesn't he? Because, as you said, his speech was all about growing up in a small town, being able to go to college, being teaching social studies and coaching football, having his kids around. Being someone who is absolutely the opposite to Donald Trump, arguably.
Yeah, and I think, there are people who can relate to it. I mean, he also talked about, that growing up in a small town, he grew up hunting. He obviously, served in the military in the reserves for over 20 years. So he also has an affinity for guns, which, is something that rural community members can connect with. So there is something there, but I think, when you look at his politics, when you look what he has done, especially since he became governor of Minnesota, enacting a lot of so-called liberal legislation, I think there's still a disconnect to a lot of, rural Americans who just do not agree with, let it be, reproductive rights, let it be abortion. So I think he's trying to make the case, and I think he's doing a nice job, but I'm not sure if he's really reaching, the people that this campaign really needs to win in November. We will see if that changes going forward, but I think, he's doing what he has to do. I'm still questioning if it actually, reaches the people that it needs to reach.
There is, though, however, a very strongly revamped Democratic ticket that has been sort of narrated. The arc of the narration has been incredibly strong this week, hasn't it? A deliberate choice each day of someone who will push the narrative further towards Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, you already mentioned, several speakers tonight. I mean, we saw the former president, Bill Clinton. There have been questions about why he's speaking tonight. We obviously know his history when it comes to women and endorsing the potentially first female president of the United States. But he made the case. There was Oprah Winfrey, who is actually from Chicago and has somewhat in the past tried to not become too political. But even she thought, it's important enough this election to come out and support Vice President Harris. And, those are, I think, important endorsements. But again, they don't really, at the moment go beyond what we've seen the past 2 days. And I thought tonight's speeches, while they were all good and they made the case for a Harris-Walz ticket, they didn't really advance the message any further than we've already heard. I mean, this is really about trying to communicate to the voters that there's a difference between Trump and Vance and Harris and Walz, and that difference is so stark that one is about darkness. I think Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, mentioned that one is about darkness, and this year is about joy, hopefulness. And that's what we've been hearing throughout the speeches.
Tomorrow is Kamala Harris's day. What is expected from that?
Yeah, obviously, tomorrow is the big day. We're definitely, people here are excited. I talked to a couple of delegates. I mean, they can't wait to actually hear from her. I mean, she obviously made a surprise appearance on the first evening, and the crowd went wild here inside the United Center. What we expect is a little bit more of what we've been hearing for now the past 3 days, but also a little bit more policy. Hopefully, a little bit more on the policy front, a little bit more transparency and details of what she really wants to do should she win in November. I mean, last week, she presented a couple of economic ideas and measures that she would like to enact. And there's a hope here that she will present a little bit more on that front. Also on social justice, which obviously as a former state general attorney is something, that she's very much capable of delivering. And it's, most people here hope to hear a little bit more on the policy front, because I think that's something where she can really differentiate herself from Trump, who, is, as we've seen over the past 9 years now, is not somebody who really gives big policy speeches and lays out a real plan. And so I think, a lot of Democrats here want to hear more on that front.
Finally, HD, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is expected to end his presidential campaign now.
Yes, there were several media reports that came out today and have hinted at that. His campaign has not said anything official, but according to those reports, he's considering endorsing former President Trump. There was a media event before tonight's DNC where a Harris campaign member was asked about those reports. And basically the notion from the Harris campaign is that, this is not completely unexpected, but we don't really think this will change a lot. I think that remains to be seen. But, when you think of who would potentially vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's already people who are more aligned, I would say, with Republicans. So I don't think it would really make a huge dent. And we will see if this comes, tomorrow on the last day of the DNC or later, the official endorsement. But, all indications are that RFK Jr. will endorse the former president, and probably, hoping, should the former president win, that he would get a spot in his cabinet.
H.J. Mai in Chicago, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Monocle Radio. Now, for more from the DNC and the challenge of keeping voters enthusiastic, Monocle's US editor Chris Lord has been down onto the floor of the convention and has spoken to delegates from 3 states. First, he talked to delegates from New Jersey. Frank Miner is mayor of Logan Township, and Ahmed Awad is an attorney and uncommitted delegate who refused to vote for Joe Biden during the primaries due to his support for Israel in its war in Gaza.
I'm one of 2 uncommitted delegates here in the state of New Jersey, and the demands that me and those who voted me into this position are asking for is for Kamala Harris and her team to also have some policy change. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We're asking for an arms embargo on Israel.
I ask, have you heard enough about foreign policy this week?
I don't think I have, and I'm looking for, we continue to hear a lot of empty words. I'm looking for action. I want to see policy change. And that's what I'm hoping that will come out of this convention.
The Democrat Party is a broad church with lots of different viewpoints. There will be those who disagree about foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Middle East. Is there a way to settle that within the party, do you think?
I think that there's always a way. Kamala and Governor Walz both are 2 people who are seasoned veterans who realize that what needs to happen in order for America to continue to prosper.
Now, Ahmed, obviously you're an uncommitted as it stands, an uncommitted delegate. A huge number of people feel the way you do especially across the Midwest, where we are right now. When you actually get to that day when you're stood in front of the ballot paper, what does that decision look like? Where do you think you'll be at that point?
The uncommitted campaign has reached out to the Harris campaign, and they're working together, and we're hoping to have some type of communication line. And I believe that, one thing that we continue to hear is that we're all under one big tent. And we believe that we need to see that. We want to see that, the human rights of Palestinians and those Palestinian Americans who are in here and those who support us are, also included in that tent.
Could you just start by saying your names and where you've come from and what you do back home?
Ashley Fidan, Lakewood, Washington. I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist.
Representative Jamila Taylor, Federal Way, Washington. In my daytime life, I'm an attorney and a state legislator.
When you're knocking on doors, going out for the party to talk to people about what they care about, what the voter cares about, what do you hear most there from Washington State?
We have a housing shortage. We have a workforce shortage. Folks want options and opportunity. And so we have to think about how we have an inclusive economic future. We need to make sure that parents have access to affordable childcare. We need to have access to affordable health care. We have to have access to reproductive care and reproductive rights.
Now, a month ago, could you have imagined that Kamala Harris would be the change candidate that she's being presented as she has this week?
I was a Biden delegate. I was very excited to come here to present and be present for President Biden as he moved forth. What we've learned in this past month is what true leadership is. It would be a different vibe, but I think the excitement would still be very, very present.
Before I let you go, I must ask, these amazing hats. Kamala and the Revolution with a flashing cowboy hat. Has that come all the way from Washington State?
It has, and this is actually an homage to the culture change that is coming. Beyonce's last album, Cowboy Carter, this is about freedom. And we are here to embrace the freedom of what Kamala Harris is going to bring forward.
So first of all, just tell me your names and where you've come from.
I'm Connor Romblad, and I'm a Maryland delegate, and I'm from Bivalve, Maryland.
Michelle Dapper. I am from Talbot County, Maryland.
Now tell me, there's a huge amount of momentum here, passion, excitement, enthusiasm. What do you think the nominees need to do to translate that onto the campaign trail?
As they continue to roll out policy proposals that speak to their passion for fighting for working families, for the common good, and for people like me to afford homes, because I'm looking to buy one, that will continue to translate out, because that message resonates for one simple reason. It's what we need, and she understands us on a level that it's been a long time coming.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Monocle's Chris Lord there at the DNC in Chicago. We'll have more from the convention throughout the day on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist. 8:17 in Kiev, 7:17 here in London. Now, just where do India's security alliances lie? A month after a two-day visit to Moscow, where he was seen hugging the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will now travel to Ukraine for a meeting with the president there, Volodymyr Zelensky. It's the latest in a series of high-profile moves by Delhi, including a comprehensive strategic partnership with Malaysia and a deepening of security cooperation with Japan as well. Well, I'm joined now by Maya Sharma, who's a journalist based in Bengaluru. A very good morning to you, Maya. Good afternoon.
Good morning, Emma.
Good to have you with us on the programme. Welcome back. Now, just answer this question for me. Do you think Volodymyr Zelensky will hug Narendra Modi?
I think Narendra Modi will hug Volodymyr Zelensky. I don't think that's optional when it comes to leaders meeting Prime Minister Modi. He is a big hugger, that is for sure.
Then you have the immediate parallels that are being drawn, or that could be drawn, between Narendra Modi and however he greets Volodymyr Zelensky, and how that famous hug between Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi basically cast some pretty terrible optics during that visit.
Well, of course, it did get a lot of criticism from Zelensky himself, who said it was a blow for peace in the region. He was very, very unhappy with Prime Minister Modi's visit to Putin at that time, especially at a time when much of the Western world has been criticizing Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. The United States also quite unhappy with the move by India's Prime Minister to actually go there to validate Putin in that context. But of course, the relationship between India and Russia goes back decades. It has been a very close relationship for years, whether it comes to defense ties and other ties as well. And India has gone on record as saying, the Ministry of External Affairs say, it is not a zero-sum game, and that the relationship between India, the ties with Russia and Ukraine, are independent of each other, that it's not a zero-sum game. So whether the Ukraine or the United States is actually very happy with that statement, well, that's not very clear. But India maintains that one does not have anything to do with the other, which is, of course, like you said, difficult optics.
Indeed.
When it comes to greeting somebody.
I mean, do we know what this independence is, this sort of independent stance, and whether it is indeed possible?
Well, it is, of course, very hard when two countries are at war to say that you're friends with both. And India has not been part of any UN condemnation of Russia. It has, of course, been against the violence, been against the war. And as Prime Minister Modi has gone on record saying that it is an era for peace. He reiterated this when he was speaking to people of Indian origin in Warsaw also. He said he is not for the war, he is for peace, but he has stopped short. India has stopped short of condemning Russia for its actions in Ukraine. So that, of course, doesn't go down very well with Ukraine, with Russia, with India also still using Russian oil, not joining the sanctions that the West has put on Russia. So it is a very difficult balancing act. But this invitation was issued by Zelensky for Modi to actually go there to Kiev. And that 8-hour visit, it will be only 8 hours, but it is significant in that India is saying, we do care for you too.
Do you think there will be some damage control done here?
I do think that the damage control has already started by the very fact that the invitation was issued and that Prime Minister Modi has agreed to go there. He is making that trip by train from the border of Poland to Kiev. He'll be there for 8 hours. And I think that is very important that he is physically going there, physically meeting Zelensky to reiterate that he is committed to that country's well-being also. So yes, damage control. Again, it's all optics. It's all the sense of saying, we are here for you too. But I do think it is an important move both for the invitation to be given and for the invitation to have been accepted.
What is India's ultimate aim here? I mean, when you look at the way that Narendra Modi has been playing things, it looks like that India is now the perfect example of a very transactional approach to security that the world is now embracing. Do you think India will succeed at this?
It's very hard to say because India does depend a lot on Russia when it comes to defense equipment. That dependence has been reducing over the decades from a huge, almost 70% dependent on Russia for this equipment. It has reduced now to less than 50%, but it still is a hugely important player when it comes to the defense of Russia. And India does not want to alienate Russia in any way. That is definitely for sure. But India is also getting an increasing role in the region, especially when it comes as a balance to China. And as a result, the United States may stop short in its condemnation of India's closeness to Russia. Ukraine also knows that India is a big player in the region, a big player in the world now. And nobody wants to condemn India outright for its actions. So it is playing a balance, knowing that it is a growing power in its own right, whether it's as a huge market, whether a superpower, a regional superpower, we could say. So really, it is a balancing act being played by India, with everybody knowing that India at this stage cannot be ignored.
And we now have, as I mentioned at the beginning of this item, the agreement with Malaysia, but also this agreement or an updated security agreement with Japan. I mean, this is India working very hard on all fronts, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. India's focusing in its region as well. The Indo-Pacific region is, of course, hugely important for the country when it comes to trade, when it comes to defense, when it comes to many issues. And the ASEAN group is a very important group for India as well, both in terms of politics and in terms of trade. And yes, like you said, Japan had sent its foreign minister and its defense minister here, who met with their counterparts here in New Delhi in India. And also they met with the prime minister as well. It's an updating really of an agreement between Japan and India to actually enhance cooperation in different fields, whether it comes to defense. We're talking of Japanese warships potentially being repaired in India, and also a very high-tech radio antenna, which Japan may be supplying now to India for warships. So there's an increasing defense cooperation between them. They're already conducting joint exercises. They conducted many joint exercises across all three, the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. So Japan and India do have this defense agreement. And with Malaysia as well, there is an attempt to actually kind of patch up things which had gone wrong in the recent past.
Maya Sharma, thank you. Maya Sharma, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:24. Still to come.
Now, I'm someone without a car, so I'm very interested. I'm typical of well, in many ways, I'm not typical young Japanese. Young Japanese people are not buying cars. So what all these car companies are doing, how can we appeal to them? How can we make them look cool again? So I felt like some of these cars might appeal to the young Japanese, the reluctant car buyer.
That's our Tokyo Bureau Chief, Fiona Wilson, there, making the case for pint-sized vehicles, as our editors in London and Tokyo dive into Monocle magazine's September mobility issue. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
.26 here in London. Let's have a look at today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow on the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House and a regular voice here. Welcome back, Yossi. How are things?
Good morning. Well, personally, the world is not as well.
OK, well, you then? All well with you?
all well, yeah. Enjoying kind of a quiet summer. Went...
Your daughter got married. I'm not entirely sure how quiet that was.
Well, it was wonderful. I mean, it was actually mentioned already on Monocle.
Oh, right.
That's, they got married in a beautiful wedding in Loch Lomond. So the happy couple is back living in Scotland.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that somewhere it's going well. Let's have a look at some of the paper articles that you've brought in for us today. We've spoken extensively and we've covered extensively the Democratic National Convention in Chicago as the world moves, the Democrats' world moves towards Kamala Harris as the presidential nominee. There's a really interesting article in the Washington Post that you wanted to draw our attention to in terms of the way that they are framing all this.
Yeah, because part of the generation change or shift or passing the torch is moving for talking about democracy. President Biden mentioned many times the need to defend democracy. This was the theme of 2020, and now again defending democracy 2024. In other words, Trump is a threat to democracy, while Kamala Harris and the younger generation are talking more about freedoms. And I think, in a way, this article makes too much of it because you can't separate, or you shouldn't separate between democracy and freedom. Democracy is more the processes, are the mechanism, but they are not for this democracy's sake or mechanism for democracy. It's exactly to defend these freedoms. And I think it's interesting that no one mentioned FDR, the American president in the 30s and 40s, because he's the one that talked about the four freedoms. So the theme in American politics of freedom always been there. But now I think the young generation would like to emphasize the need for freedoms because they feel that it's not that only the democratic system is threatened, but their own freedom is threatened because of the level of violence, because of decisions, for instance, of the Supreme Court when it comes to abortion. So because health is not affordable and available. So they're moving the emphasis, but it's not exchanged in many ways to compromise the need for the democratic system to be robust.
Let's also touch on the fact that there were protests outside the convention by those who believed that President Biden's stance on the war in Gaza needs to change. There was the family of a hostage. They actually made an appearance at the convention. So this complicates matters enormously, doesn't it?
Yes, because it's, again, the Israeli-Palestinian, especially the war in Gaza, divides opinion in the United States. And at the same time, there was a feeling that it's going also to affect the results in some swing states in the United States, and hence the results of the presidential election. But, in many ways, when we see the protests saying that Biden is not doing enough to end the war, but at the same time claiming not doing enough to release the hostages, and we see two sides of the same coin, that a ceasefire is necessary to end the suffering in Gaza and the killing and devastation, but also to release of the hostages, because what we see right now, and you can understand the predicament, the horrific situation that the parents of the hostages, the family of the hostages feel when they see that when Israel release hostages is mainly they find bodies, they bring back home bodies. And we don't know how many of the hostages are still alive, but every day is crucial right now to bring as many as the hostages alive. So they appeal. And sometimes we forget that there are quite a number of the hostages that are either not Israelis or dual citizenship. So this is also the role of, whether the UK or Thailand or the United States to work and try to release their hostages and citizens.
And the US has been very much behind the diplomatic push in the last few months, ever since October the 7th. And there's an article in the Financial Times which basically sums up the efforts that America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, has gone to in the last 4 or 5 days. I mean, his tour of the Middle East has tried to take in some of the key players, trying to push this deal over the line.
To be blunt, and not very successfully so.
Are you surprised by that?
Yes.
Why?
I think because I think the United States has more power that it's ready to use, and more influence on the sides, or on also the sides that can affect both sides. And it's not only because it's an Israeli and Palestinian interest to reach a ceasefire, even if it's not necessarily the interest of the leadership of both sides to reach a ceasefire, because it's the interest of the United States. If, God forbid, there is a regional war, it's going to affect the interests of the United States, of the region, of the entire world. We saw how the impact of, for instance, the war in Ukraine had impact on the rest of the world, and this probably would be even worse. I think the United States, and it goes back to the previous question, is, on the one hand, when talk about the stance of Biden, the stance is all right. I mean, what Biden says is promoting the idea of ceasefire, of ending the war, moving to a two-state solution, but it's not ready to exert its influence in order to achieve it. And this is the 9th Blinken visit to the region without success.
And this is being reflected in the FT article that you brought in for us today, saying that Blinken reiterating that Israel has endorsed the US proposal to overcome the differences between Netanyahu and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, the so-called sort of bridging agreement to bring about the ceasefire. But Netanyahu in the FT is saying has doubled down on his insistence that Israel will retain troops on the Philadelphia corridor. You've got this idea that the US is saying that the Israelis have said yes. Benjamin Netanyahu says no, I haven't. And then you also have in the same article, next paragraph, Hamas has accused the US of pro-Israel bias and insisting that mediators stick to previous agreements. There is that sense that the US is saying we're getting closer, but both sides are saying no, we are not.
I mean, we always getting closer, but at some point we get to, we need to reach the destination, and we are not reaching it. And this is more than 10 months into this horrific war. The fact that the United States is supporting Israel, not Hamas, is not that shocking news. But the fact is how they make both sides understand that this is the will of the international community. I think it's important. When Netanyahu says, I agree the term of this agreement, there are always coming new conditions. Now, we need to go beyond the ceasefire, and beyond the ceasefire, if the United States in its bridging proposal agrees Israel to stay in Gaza, is this a long term? Are we going still in 20 years to see Israeli troops in Gaza? Or we agree also this is an interim proposal, and we move quickly into a peace process or something that will end. Otherwise, we'll see the reoccupation of Gaza, and we'll have the same conversation for many years to come.
Finally, let's touch briefly on an article in The Guardian that we wanted to bring to us, which is the idea of programme making, television, and diversity within the industry. And there have been calls that actually class should be treated as a diversity and inequality issue.
And sometimes we don't think about class as diversity in the same way we look at ethnicity or religion or sexuality. And here is James Graham, that known for, writing the script for famous TV show Sherwood and others, and coming from a working class background, from a mining community in Nottinghamshire, you need to look at class in a similar way, because it's not just a matter of income or a place, geographical place. It's a way of thinking. It's about values. And if you have only, he says, 8% of those who write scripts in TV come from working class background, it means that also these values are not reflected in what the viewers watch on TV, and this has to be rectified.
Yossi Meckelberg, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The time here in London is 7:35 a.m. Let's have a look at the latest news headlines. Egypt has expressed scepticism about a so-called bridging proposal intended to close gaps in ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. Diplomatic efforts have redoubled as fears grow over wider regional war, with US President Joe Biden speaking to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. Ukraine has attacked Moscow in what Russian officials called one of the biggest drone strikes on the capital since February 2022. Russia says its air defences destroyed a total of 45 drones over Russian territory, including 11 over the Moscow region. A Greek-flagged tanker is adrift on the Red Sea following repeated attacks on the vessel. Iran-aligned Houthi militants have launched strikes on international shipping near Yemen since November in support of Palestinians in the war between Israel and Hamas. The Houthis have so far not yet claimed responsibility for Wednesday's attacks. And Brazil says it is to limit the number of foreign citizens entering the country as part of a plan to stop people from using Brazil as a base to migrate to the US and Canada. The move, which will begin on Monday, will affect Asian migrants who require visas to remain in Brazil. More than 70% of requests for refugees at airports come from people with either Indian, Nepalese or Vietnamese nationalities. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Time now for some in-house news. Monocle magazine's September issue is hitting the stands around the world today. It's a mobility special, a very handsome one too, all about planes, trains and automobiles. Listen in as our editor Josh Fennett joins design editor Nick Moniz and Tokyo Bureau Chief Fiona Wilson to peel back the cover and dive into this issue.
So I'm joined in studio now by Monocle's design editor, Nick Moniz, and down the line from our Tokyo bureau, Fiona Wilson, a familiar voice to many Monocle Radio listeners, but not to me and Nick for the past few weeks, because we're here to talk about the issue. But let's first talk about the fact that you've been away. What's that been like?
Yeah, I think I left Tokyo about the hottest time of the year, so everybody's been telling me gleefully that I missed these mad temperatures. Pretty hot still, and I did miss an absolutely massive typhoon, so all in all, not a bad time to be away from Tokyo.
OK, so you've been testing mobility, which brings us nicely, a nice little segue.
How's that for a segue, Josh Fennett?
Into the theme of the out now September issue of Monocle magazine. Now, Fiona, it's always hard to know with freight and air services coming to Tokyo. Do you have a copy of the new issue there with you?
I do. I have it right in front of me. I've been enjoying it.
Go on then, first impressions on what I'm going to call a new look cover.
Well, I love the cover. Obviously, I know the model. He is a regular at Monocle events in Tokyo. He's great. And I really loved, and to see him in Zurich, I love the combination. It's brilliant.
So we've got this kind of sort of wistful character looking out of a window. Doesn't look like he's got much on. He's at the Hauptbahnhof in Zurich. Reminds me of our design editor, Nick Moniz, on production week when we're putting these issues to bed, gazing out of the window, not a care in the world.
I thought this was going to be a chance for me to talk about my brief modelling career. I thought that's where we were going with this.
Absolutely not. We're sticking very much to the issue. So, Nick, as we dive under the covers, so to speak, you and I, tell me what you're looking forward to in the issue, what you think readers will get to excite them.
We'll start again with the cover. It's a very handsome man on a very handsome-looking train. This is all about, I guess, the mobility survey, and I think that's where I want to start. We're going to dive straight into that. This was obviously in the business section, so looking at transport through, I guess, the lens of the economy, the role it can play in shaping cities, in shaping countries, in moving goods around the globe. But it's this really sort of beautiful deep dive, looking at everything from, I guess, small cars zipping around in Zurich, beautiful bikes, through to, I guess, huge shipping stories. But I think the one that really jumps out at me, my personal favourite, was this sort of mad story following a taxi through the streets of Florence. And it was this whole idea about the Ford Tornado is this new, I guess, 8-seater vehicle that's really become, I guess, the luxury people mover of choice, if that can be such a thing. And looking at how perhaps maybe the Mercedes is being squeezed out by this rather impressive vehicle by Ford. So we followed them around the city for a day, look at them picking up people, how it moves, how it changes people's relationship with the city. And I think that's really beautiful. But I noticed you flip to the next page. We're going the exact opposite direction. Small cars.
Yeah, small cars, such an interesting thing for Monocle because, as you say, we're interested in how cities are connected to one another. There's a big aviation report by Andrew Muller on the Farnborough Air Show, who's buying what, the next moves in aviation. But an interesting story perhaps to come to Fiona about. There's amazing Asia coverage throughout the issue about the Toyota Alphard. We go to a Thai diplomat school. We interview Raymond Ang, the head of a company in Manila, one of the Philippines' biggest companies. San Miguel is one of its offshoots, so not Spanish for anyone that thought that, who's building airports. But I've come to this beautiful illustrated spread put together by Naomi Xu Elegant. Amazing name, great writer, works for us in Singapore. And she's talking about this new generation of micro cars, Fiona. Do you call them K cars in Japan? KEI?
That's right, K cars. Yeah, I absolutely love Naomi's story, partly because there are quite a few Japanese vehicles in there, inevitably. Because, the roads are busy here, but people just don't have space to park. And I thought it was a brilliant idea to say who's doing a really well-designed small car. If you look at the top 10 selling cars in Japan, often they're at least half the top 10 of these. They're very small. They've got a max speed. You see the tiny roads around Tokyo and they really make sense. Now, I'm someone without a car, so I'm very interested. I'm typical of, well, in many ways, I'm not typical young Japanese. Young Japanese people are not buying cars. So what all these car companies are doing, how can we appeal to them? How can we make them look cool again? So I felt like some of these cars might appeal to the young Japanese, the reluctant car buyer.
And I'm going to ask for your opinion on one of my favourite stories from the mobility section, written by our foreign editor, Alexis Self. He goes to Brussels and he interviews the leaders of this campaign called Good Move, which is all about pedestrianising and adding cycle lanes to the city centre. But I think he's done a very interesting thing. He's gone and talked to the people who really oppose this move and the people who are intending to bring down those in City Hall who are trying to overlay the city with bike lanes. And it's a very nuanced point. It talks about how bike lanes are great for people who live within a certain distance of the city, but it doesn't take into account how communities might be divided by their presence. It doesn't take into account people who need their cars to earn a living. So there's this sort of blue-collar, white-collar divide. And in Brussels as well, a city where integration is always an issue that's on everyone's tongue, certain ethnic minority communities are divided by the bike lanes from getting access to the city centre. So I just wonder if there's any such debate. I know there aren't the same issues of integration in Japan, but are bike lanes universally good? Are we happy to see more of them? Or are they kind of being retrofitted into funny places where they don't always fit? I'd be keen to hear your perspective.
Well, Josh, you will not be surprised to know that, as always, Japan has the answer to these questions. I mean, Tokyo is just the biggest city, and most of the people I know do not have a car, and I think that says it all. It's an amazing city to walk around, and the public transport is fantastic, and bike lanes are not thought of as this attack on cars. So it's interesting, you don't really have that discussion, which I hear about it a lot in London and in other big cities. It's just not really the same here, partly as well because bikes, you ride on the pavement, although the pavements are pretty much non-existent. So it's just really different. And a lot of the people you're talking about, they can't do their jobs. A lot of those people are doing their jobs on two wheels in Tokyo. So a postman will be on a little two-wheeled electric scooter, a little Honda Super Cub, going very, very slowly. So it's just a really different discussion. I think it's a non-issue here that what they want to do is keep the city moving, and isn't that what's really what any city should want?
Absolutely. And amazing that these things often come down to etiquette. So you've got the hardware of the city, how it looks and how people are supposed to use it. But you've also got the software of how people use it, whether they're zinging past on an electric scooter, knocking you down, or whether they're politely delivering the post. Nick Moniz, I'm coming to you. I can see you.
I was going to say, I think it's all about time and place, like anything. It's like bike lanes can be amazing if they're in the right places. Maybe it is in that dense urban core, like you said, but maybe as we start to stretch out, it's not taking over every single road. Maybe it's just following a commuter route in, a commuter rail route in. I think it really is about finding, the appropriate time and place.
And if you put cars between the cyclists and the road, then obviously people are made safer. So there's lots of decisions there. Now, Fiona, I know one of your favourite parts of any issue is when we let our imaginations run away with us and we do the perfect. We've done the perfect airport, we've done the perfect hotel in the past, and a flight of fancy over what looks like probably 10 or 20,000 words by the number of pages it's been given, is Nick Moniz's perfect train. Nick, tell us more.
I mean, I really, really want to get on board this train, partly because I helped co-design it with our art team, with our editorial director as well. But the whole idea was that, I think so often, the Monocle team spends a heap of time on trains, traversing Europe, Fiona going up and down Japan. But I think the quality across the board tends to be a little bit lower. Maybe they're lacking a little bit of inspiration. They're taking cues from commercial flying stock. And we wanted to look at, I guess, what could the ideal train look like? And this is, I guess, coming back to it's a beautiful, efficient way to travel, but let's make it enjoyable as well. So we've designed our own dining car, of course. We've got everything from, I guess, the perfect kiosk on the train station platform. What's that serving? Josh, I'm assuming you're a big fan of yuzu lemonade as a refreshing drink. Fiona as well, no doubt. We've got that through to, I guess, how you negotiate, I guess, being with other people in a confined space. So if somebody wants to make a phone call, is there the perfect phone booth? Yes, we've built that in. Is there a place for kids to maybe run around? We've designed a child-friendly booth. And, maybe if you want to continue to do some work, is there a space where there's fast Wi-Fi, good plugs for keeping your computer battery charged? Again, you can maybe have a discreet little meeting. So we wanted to include all these features in the perfect train and really, I guess, design what could be the model way to move around any continent.
No expense spared. I took a good train journey last week between Paris and Zurich. I actually saw you in Zurich, which is very nice. Then I took a boat in Zurich, so we can talk about all forms of transport. But the TGV Lyria is an amazing service that crosses out through the northeast of France. But the thing I really noticed, the stock is fine. There was no dining service taken through the carriage because everyone's on holiday, as is the French way. But the amazing thing was there was an etiquette, and there were these little banquettes out in the corridors where people were ushered when they were making phone calls, and all it really took was a kind of stern glare of another passenger to get someone to move out there. So again, you can have these amazing carriages and you can have someone ruin the experience. So often it's the etiquette or having a conductor who can go in and say, you know what, keep it down.
And maybe we've addressed staffing in that as well, because I had a similar issue coming from St. Moritz back to Zurich over the weekend, and Sophie Grove, the editor of Confect, and I were sitting down in this what was initially a peaceful carriage until 3 young people rolled on and started playing Yahtzee next to us. So
how young?
We're talking early 20s. They were definitely university age,
Fine.
so old enough to know better.
They know better. I actually had the great good and bad fortune of carrying a 6-month-old child for the entire journey, so no one could shout at me when I was making too much noise, which was it's kind of a get out of jail free card. But I could see some French insouciance to my attitude.
We've designed the perfect space for you on this train.
You're going to put them in a box, a soundproof box, is it?
With you as well, obviously.
Fiona, before we wrap up, I know that you are obviously an experienced journalist, traveller, done lots of things around the world. But on your recent trip, which has involved going back to the UK, going to Spain, did you take any memorable journeys? Did you make any observations? Did your journalistic eye clock anything that you think we need to know about in the world of mobility, travel and transport?
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I felt like the last few trips to the UK have honestly been blighted by some of the worst train journeys I can remember, mostly delays and goodness knows what else. But this time I took a nice journey on the Chiltern Railway and I went up to Stratford-upon-Avon. And actually it was great. And I was with my mother and we were saying, isn't it wonderful? And the man opposite me started a conversation saying, you think it's wonderful now, but if you came during the time when it's not the holidays, it's standing room only. And actually a really nice conversation. Other people started joining in. So I thought one of the things I really like is talking to people on these journeys. So I was pretty impressed with that. I was also very impressed with the buses in Mallorca. They're all brand spanking new. And I thought, who's paying for these buses? And I noticed it said co-financed by the European Union. So Another sad feeling as a Brit that we won't get anything like that in the UK.
Yeah, amazing. And so nice that you took a train journey and it wasn't a Shakespearean tragedy, but you did have a good time in Stratford-upon-Avon. Fiona Wilson in Tokyo, thank you so much. Nick Moniz in studio here in Midori House. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks too to Nick Moniz and Fiona Wilson there. The September Mobility Special edition of the magazine is out today. You're with Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:50 here in London. Let's talk business now with Isabel Hamilton, senior reporter at the Daily Upside. A very good morning to you, Isabel.
Good morning.
Tell us what's happening in the world of electric vehicles and Ford.
Well, things aren't going too well. So Ford announced yesterday that it's cancelling plans to manufacture this new SUV, this electric SUV. And just cancelling the plans means it has to swallow a $1.9 billion loss. But Ford would rather do that than actually go ahead with making the EV. And the reason it says it's doing that is that they don't see this EV becoming profitable in even a year's time after it comes out. And it's part of this overall trend we're seeing in the electric vehicle sector, where a lot of legacy automakers are really pulling back on making electric vehicles because they're sort of at this really difficult point where it's hard to get new consumers to buy them.
What's going wrong here when it comes to electric vehicles? You were talking about consumers there, but also the fact that the big beasts, the enormous giants in car making, are not quite getting a grip on it, are they?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just them. I think the market overall has slowed. And part of that is to do with, the first wave of people who bought electric vehicles. They were early adopters. They were excited about the technology. Now we're at the point where we sort of want ordinary people to buy them. And the fact is that most electric vehicles are still quite expensive compared to any other kind of car that you can buy. The exception being ones that are manufactured in China, which are benefiting from absolutely massive state subsidies. So really the issue here is price point, with a little kind of extra bit of worry about charging your car. We still haven't got a complete infrastructure for EV charging compared to, say, going to a petrol station.
Let's turn to another industry which is changing its use, and that's the big power station. And it coincides with, the decline of the power station is coinciding with the need for more data centres. And guess what's happening?
Yeah, so this was a report in the Financial Times that big tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they are buying up old decommissioned power stations to convert them into data centers. And the reason for that is they're all chasing after generative AI. And AI takes a vast amount of power. And these old power stations, they don't produce power anymore, but they have these infrastructural characteristics that are really useful if you want to build a data center that's going to suck up absolutely tons of electricity. They've got hookups for large power inputs. They've got water sources nearby, which are also very important for data centers. They need a lot of water to cool them. So yeah, big tech is sort of out shopping for old decommissioned power stations.
Isabel Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Now, finally, our focus turns to the bridesmaids of the airline world, the secondary city airport. Long seen as a cheaper, grittier and sometimes harder to reach transport hub, in certain parts of Southeast Asia at least, they're now being celebrated, not least because they're often the more practical option. Well, Adam Hancock is a journalist based in Singapore. A very warm welcome to Monocle Radio, Adam.
Hello, good morning.
Good to have you with us. Now, one of the examples that's being heralded as this new city airport fashion is Kuala Lumpur using Subang Airport as an overspill.
Yes, absolutely. So Subang Airport was traditionally the main airport in Kuala Lumpur, but what happened and has happened in a number of cities here is that with the increase in air travel, both regionally and internationally in this part of the world, they needed more space, they needed bigger airports, bigger runways. So a lot of the the airports, they moved out of the city where there's more room. They built these huge international airports. And then the smaller kind of traditional airports close to the city got left behind, basically. They lost a lot of their flights. Subang Airport, for example, just had a few domestic flights left. But over time, what is happening now is that the capacity is actually being reached in the bigger airports, and they need more space. So these other airports are coming back into fashion, as it were, and starting to operate again and allow regional flights or domestic flights. But they also have this unique advantage of being a lot closer to the city. So take Kuala Lumpur, for example. The international airport there is about an hour out of the city on a good day, which is quite the trek into town, especially if you're only coming for a night or two. Whereas Subang Airport is much more central. It's about a 30-minute drive, can be as quick as 15-20 minutes depending on the traffic. And so therefore you can market it as somewhere where if you need a very quick trip to the city, you just come and come into that airport. And it's kind of similar to London City Airport, in contrast to, say, Heathrow or Gatwick, where it's just a lot more convenient.
And indeed, Kuala Lumpur is now restarting flights from Subang, and they're not the only place in that part of the world, are they? That you can talk to us about. Let's say that if you're in Bangkok, for example, that you've started to use closer airports closer to the town centre than you would do ordinarily.
Yep, absolutely. So Bangkok is another example of this. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but I think it's Don Muang Airport was, again, the traditional airport. Then they built a fancy new airport outside the city, but they've slowly started bringing flights back. And it definitely is a consideration. So Bangkok is an interesting one. It's not that much closer, but the kind of the roads and the traffic is a lot better to the smaller city airport. So, I mean, you're often kind of forced there anyway because a lot of low-cost regional flights go there automatically. The international airport is more geared towards, your long-haul flights. But it's definitely a thought process if you're going into Bangkok and you're going to be there for a short amount of time. The traffic is horrendous. And when you're coming from the main international airport, it's all great for a while. You go down a large highway and you think, right, we're cruising here. But then you turn off the highway towards the city centre and you're just in gridlock traffic. So, yeah, it's definitely a consideration.
All this is pointing to the fact that the use of smaller airports, which are closer to town, are used, as we mentioned a moment ago, as overspill, which is an indication that aviation in Southeast Asia is growing apace.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there was a few difficult years with COVID and a lot of travel restrictions in this region, but it was rapidly expanding before that, and it's come back with a bang. I regularly get emails from a lot of the airlines here advertising new routes, new airports opening up. I think Boeing have said that travel within Southeast Asia is going to grow faster than anywhere else in the world over the next 20 years. Low-cost airlines like AirAsia, Scoot, Lion Air, they're all doing very well, offering cheap flights. And there's a lot of business travel as well. A lot of businesses would open an office in Bangkok, but also Ho Chi Minh City and Manila and Jakarta. So there's a lot of people just darting about this region, and obviously tourism and travelers. So yeah, it's a huge market, and they're going to need more space because there's going to be more more routes, more airplanes. It's the whole industry is growing so much that they need space and they need more airports.
Adam Hancock in Singapore, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Vincent McAviney, Chris Chermack and Tom Webb. Our researcher was Sana Jimani and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be back with the briefing live at midday here in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.